The president's latest move in his trade war has Republicans fuming. They really do not like this $12 billion in emergency aid for farmers who are hurt by the tariffs, a solution to a problem created by the president himself.
When you choose a war of choice, which is what this trade war is, and then you say afterwards, let's just solve it by buying people gold-plated crutches, the farmers and ranchers of America, they don't want crutches. They want to work.
This is a bad deal all the way around. Bad for the taxpayers, horrible for farmers. It just, it's just a bad deal.
Give me trade, not aid. We've spent decades developing these markets. Let us have access to them. End the trade war now.
The president responding this morning on Twitter, quote, "Every time I see a weak politician asking to stop trade talks or the use of tariffs to counter unfair tariffs, I wonder, what can they be thinking?" And let me just make something clear before I move on. I don't think there is anyone saying, please stop trade talks. People are saying, please stop with unnecessary tariffs that make no sense. Those are two different things, and the president is conflating two issues, and those tariffs are hurting the American people. This is coming as he gets ready to meet with the president of the European Commission. On the table, tariffs on European car imports that could jeopardize a $1 trillion trade relationship with 15 million jobs at stake on both sides of the Atlantic. Remember, states like South Carolina, you know what they do? Have auto manufacturing plants for some of those overseas companies. Joining me now, Fred Kemp. He's the CEO and president of the Atlantic Council, MSNBC political contributor, and my friend Jason Johnson, politics editor at TheRoot.com, and Chris Wilson, who is a Republican pollster. All right, Fred, I've got to go to you first. I was anxious to see Larry Kudlow this morning, who was on TV, because if you remember, before he joined the administration, he wrote a piece just a few weeks before urging the president not to move forward with tariffs. He's been a true free markets guy for decades, yet this morning he claims that this problem was not of the president's own making. Please take a listen.
Past presidents in both political parties have tried to fix the broken world trading system. China is the worst. All I'm saying is, this is not of Mr. Trump's own making. This is something that Mr. Trump inherited. Very unfair trading practices. This is a very difficult task. Reform always is. There's a swamp for the world trading system, and he's trying to drain it.
Larry Kudlow is right. Unfair trading practices exist. Credit to the president for taking them head on. But Larry Kudlow is not answering the question. The issue that we're facing today is the impact of these tariffs. By putting these tariffs forward, he has now gone around Congress and he's creating $12 billion in emergency aid for farmers using a tactic that was created during the Depression. So while the president and his administration claim the economy is stronger than ever, they are now using Depression-era vessels to save Trump voters, i.e. farmers, and by the way, not all of them.
Yeah, and now, look, first and foremost, this farm issue just underscores that his trade approach isn't working. But it's not working in a huge, broad sense and then a narrow sense. The broader sense is we are losing or could lose the ability to guide and shape the rules-based order of institutions and practices that we created with our allies after World War II. And who's going to step in to do that? Well, it's going to be just the people that Larry Kudlow is saying our biggest problem is, and that's the Chinese. In the narrower sense, with the EU Commission president in town this week, Juncker, you have two things he's trying to achieve. The first he's trying to achieve is to diffuse the crisis before it gets to auto tariffs. That would be the worst direction. And none of the advisors around the president actually want it to go in that direction, but the president may want to. The best possibility is you could actually turn this around, reverse the aluminum steel tariffs, and there is a potential for a transatlantic trade deal based on something close to zero tariffs. The president himself talked about it at the G7 in Canada, and there is a possibility that Juncker will bring some sort of deal of that sort to the table, even if it's just starting with the car industry.
Well, that would be great, but in the meantime, GM announced today $1 billion worth of losses, and they're citing rising commodity costs. That's aluminum and steel. You've got Ron Johnson saying our behavior is similar to a Soviet republic, where commissars are doling out favors and aid to industries that they choose. Lisa Murkowski is saying, fine, just the farmers. Well, what about other industries? Oil and gas, seafood, manufacturing, they're all suffering too.
Well, what I don't understand about President Trump, he has his name on golf courses, he has his name on hotels. So far, what he's been doing is dismantling things, the Iranian trade deal, and the worst decision of his administration in terms of China and trade was getting out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Since he got out of that, the Japanese put it together with 11 countries, the U.S. is out. Last week, the EU and Japan signed the biggest trade deal in history, and we're on the sidelines. And so what he has to do right now is he talks about getting leverage by being tough on trade. In many respects, that could be true. But now is the time to cash in that leverage, to close NAFTA, to get a deal on NAFTA, to get a deal to reverse what we've been doing with the EU and then get a better trade deal to show that he can get a better trade deal by being tough in the outset. But he hasn't yet shown that he can turn these trade threats into better deals. Now is the time he has to start doing that.
Kevin Hassett told us just a couple of days ago, it's not a trade war. We're currently in a trade negotiation. And to that point, we have to remind our audience, the president made a campaign promise to tear up TPP and give us something better. He tore it up. He's given us nothing. And TPP continues on without us. Chris, let's go back to the farmers. We already subsidize farmers. So how unusual is this? And to do it without the support of Congress?
Well, I don't think it is all that unusual, because if you look at, I mean, to say that this isn't working yet is sort of like saying your offensive game plan isn't working before you've even had a chance to touch the ball. And this is one thing that, as you mentioned earlier, President Trump was consistent about during the campaign. He's been really consistent about this over the last 20 years of his life, is that he feels like the U.S. has been tied up and getting the wrong side of the deal on all these, on negotiations with other countries. But, you know, I grew up on a farm in Oklahoma, and the complex system of ag credit and contracts and lending makes it a different type of scenario than it is with the commodities that you mentioned earlier, and where they had to be bailed out earlier for it to be given time to be successful. And look, President Trump, Donald Trump, has always been a high-stakes gambler. It worked for him in the real estate world, and I think that's the same approach he's taking now.
Why would you say it worked for him in the real estate world? In the real estate world, President Trump has gone bankrupt over 4 times.
Okay.
In the branding and marketing world, he's made a mint. He's been a business genius. So in getting elected, he is fantastic at taking on issues where Americans have been hurt and saying, I'm going to solve them. And you know what?
Yes.
That plays to the American people, and it should. He said, I'm going to solve income inequality when no one else had the audacity to do it. But when you actually look at the policies he's putting in place, he's hurting those people who believed him at what he does best, was selling.
Well, right now, and as his policies are given time to take hold, I think it is a matter of giving it time and to see who's going to blink first. That's really what it gets down to. Any Republican senator like a Ron Johnson or Ben Sasse who believed that Trump was going to blink first and believe these terrorists before the other side did, I think was mistaken and myopic in their approach in terms of dealing with the president. This is a chance that if he was successful, it could solve a lot of the problems that you mentioned earlier. But if he's not, to the point you're making, it could also put us into a global trade war that could be very damaging to these markets.
Okay, then I'm going to be sassy and cynical, Jason. One could say this is a political move ahead of the 2018 midterms, when you've got people in farm states, right, Trump's base, who are saying, uh-oh, I'm getting screwed here, sir.
Well, and not only that, but I love it when people gamble with everybody else's money, because that's essentially what he's doing. He's gambling.
He's always said that's what he likes to do.
Yeah, you know,
he said, we're betting with the bank's money,
exactly,
forgetting that the money inside of banks are the deposits from hardworking Americans.
Regular people in Ohio, in Indiana, in Nebraska, all places I've grown up and lived. But here's the other issue, and what this demonstrates is just like TPP and everything else that Trump works on, the guy never has a plan B. I mean, if you look at the plan, this $12 billion, part of that is supposed to be spent on opening up new markets for the farmers to sell in. Why didn't you have that in advance? Why didn't you say, I'm throwing down these tariffs because I've already cut 4 or 5 deals with these other countries? I don't know if I'm a farmer if I necessarily want to be negotiating with the U.S. government for prices. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be better for me and my product than what I was able to do with Mexico, what I was able to do with China. So there's no long-term planning. It's totally about 2018.
Okay, but you know what? Fred, let's bring you in. As it relates to China, you know, with President Obama, he was very predictable. So if you are, I'm going to say, let's call China a trading adversary. Given how predictable Obama was, they knew exactly what they wanted to do. Could the unpredictability or irrationality of Trump in some level work in his favor here? Because thus far, I don't see it, but walk me through it.
See, I think it could. So here's the narrative of a pivot to the positive with our allies that could actually end up addressing China. And Larry Kudlow said China is the worst. Well, if you want to go after China, then you want to have your allies on your side. You don't want to have your allies against us. And exactly. So you should have done TPP. That way you get the Asia allies on your side. We don't have that, but we could still dock on it. There are more than 20 parts of the TPP agreement the Japanese and others kept open because they were in our interest. We could negotiate our way back into that. The first step we have to do is we have to get NAFTA done. To get NAFTA done, you're going to have to take aluminum and steel tariffs off of Mexico and Canada, among other things. If you're going to do that, you're going to have to do that for your allies as well in Europe. So I'm watching this week as a truly important week with Juncker in town. Will he start pivoting to the positive this week, or will he double down with auto tariffs? If he's doubling down in auto tariffs, we've got some ways to go. But I do agree that you could get more. He's actually part of the reason that Trump is very popular with his constituency is he's saying things that are true. We've got bad trade deals with China. We could have better trade deals with Europe. But now is the time he has to pivot to the positive with the allies and use the leverage to get a better deal out of China. And it really has to start this week.
We have not seen much pivoting from the president across the board. But do you think on some level this is it's so crazy it just might work? Because we talk about how farmers are getting hurt, but our own colleague, Vaughn Hilliard, has been out throughout the country visiting with farmers, and many have said, let's see how this goes. I voted for the guy. Let's give him some time.
No, and I think that's really the point, is sort of the high-stakes approach of going after this and seeing who's going to blink first. And I know from everything we know about Donald Trump, it doesn't look like that's going to be him. Now, at what point does that reach the line of demarcation where it begins to hurt people in a way that you can't pull back? And I think that is moving into 2018 and kind of planning for it. I do think there are concerns in the White House that if this does go too far and our constituency is hurting, does it cost us Senate seats we might be able to pick up in North Dakota, Montana, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Indiana. And that's why you do see them taking actions now. But I think from a standpoint of it'll be really interesting to see what comes out of these meetings, because if there is the opportunity to cut a deal and Trump comes out of this with a successful renegotiation of these trade deals, then all bets are off in terms of what could happen in 2018. It really creates a positive environment for Republicans. And right now, it's sort of you don't know which way it's going to go.
Listen, the economy is doing very well. The issue, though, in the wait and see, let's see how it goes, one of the problems with that is the President of the United States lies every single day, and he lies unnecessarily. When he talks about the stock market, which has done beautifully well, and it's up 30% since he won, he lies and says it's up 40%. And so why it's hard for me to get my head around this. The people who voted for him wanted something different, and they wanted a better life, and he lies every day, and I can't figure out why. Those people support him.
Well, because he provides something sort of symbolic and emotional. He's fighting back, and that's what people have always wanted. They didn't feel like George Bush and Barack Obama was fighting for them. But here's the other thing to remember. We're talking about the midterms. These other world leaders have elections too, right? They have reasons to not blink as well. So when we're talking about, yeah, he's gonna stand up to these guys and stare them in the eye. Look, there are other world leaders who are like, yeah, I'm not gonna bend to you because I'll look bad with my own constituents. So the president, not only is he gambling with other people's savings and gambling with other people's finances, and it is sort of harvesting season. That's what we have actually going on during the midterms. You have elections in other countries where other world leaders don't want to make him look good. A lot of people don't seem to realize that looking like you're weak against Donald Trump is poison for you abroad. It's poison for you in Europe. It is poison for you in South America. So if he thinks he can bully people, he is forgetting they got jobs too.
Fred, before we go, can you think of an example of a policy in this administration where the president is fighting back, is talking tough, and actually winning?
At the moment, there isn't a really good sign of that. The people in the administration I talk to say, look, this is normal. First 2 years of an administration, you set the table. Last 2 years of the administration, you get stuff done.
Do you believe that?
No, well, I think he has to start now, because this is an administration that seems to be on acceleration in many ways. And he also has to understand this really is about who's going to be the leader of the world. The Russians are trying to replace us or displace us. the Russians are trying to disrupt us. The Chinese are trying to replace us or displace us. You see the Chinese stepping in with the EU in the same week that he's negotiating with Trump to make a statement. You see then the EU going off to Japan. So the world doesn't stay in the same place. And so there are amazing stakes and large strategic stakes here that I don't think the president entirely gets.
Well, I'm not saying that it's good or bad, but for the White House to say this is just what any administration looks like in the first 2 years is absolutely untrue. That's the White House simply talking their book.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.